the health space. Hello. We're at 543. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you once again. I hope that you had a wonderful weekend. Just take a deep breath, everybody, before we jump into yet another topic. A great import because so much is going on. It is hard to pre record these shows, and I'll tell you why. Because by the time I blink my eyes and reopen them, the story has changed.
Mhm.
I've never seen so much tumult in my life. Even my parents who are in their 80s and trust and believe, they have seen some things. They will tell you, I've never seen a time like this. I asked my father, what would you do now? He said, pray. I said, okay, because this time requires prayer, but prayer also requires that you work. Okay. Faith without works is dead. And so I don't want you to be faint of heart. Those of you who got out and marched this weekend, those of you who wanted to march, those who thought about it, those who even said, I don't know if it's going to make a difference. Believe me, you do make a difference. You do make a difference. Every phone call you make is calculated to represent X number of people. Every email represents X number of persons. Really, you do make a difference. When people look out at any capital and see X number of people, they say, that's this many voters. So get involved, everybody. We don't need to go back to the way things were. We wanted change in November of 2024. That's why we voted. You either voted this way or that way. Uh, some of you, I know, have buyer's remorse. I get it. Some of you don't, because actually President Trump's popularity is higher than that of the Democrats and the Republicans. Think about that, everybody. Because people are looking for a disruptor, because the system really is not working for folks. Let's just keep it 100. People have been living from payday to Monday. The number one driver of bankruptcy in America are your health care bills, even when you have great health insurance. You are one illness away from having everything that you own blown away, all of your savings. Might have to start selling blood. People are rationing their medicine in the United States today. So think about that. Things are not where they need to be. And then we see ourselves, now we're beginning to see the quiet part is being said out loud. We see how we are involved, and I would even say interfere in other countries and their affairs. More often than not, to a bad end for the people. All of these things we whispered about, some of us marched about it, some of us really rallied about that. But now you're beginning to see it because it's been your money. So think about that. So, which brings us to this issue, Yemen. Everyone's thinking about Signalgate, but is that really what is Signalgate what it was really about? This app. Is the app the story, or is Yemen the story? We hear about the Houthis. We're like, oh my goodness, these strange people from these strange lands. And then when you see them, they look even stranger because they do not look like they're from a Nordic land. Let's just keep it 100. That's just where we are. These are just some very interesting people with customs that we don't quite understand, but they are human beings. But who are they? Who is this poor country? And why are they of such tremendous consequence in that part of the world, and therefore in our part of the world? Was it really about the signal, or the signals that Yemen is sending to the world? Is that what it's about? Let's talk about it. I want you to meet the Santita Jackson Show on X at Santita J. Meet me on Santita Jackson and Friends on Facebook. That's the only place where I can get a friend.
Mhm.
That's the only place, Santita Jackson and Friends. You have to go to the fan page. Someone told me I will not join your fan page. I'm your friend. I said, you are my friend, but they're going to kick you off, and it will not be my fault because they limit you. So please, please, the only place I can really accept friends and interact is on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. I'm on Blue Sky at Santita, well, at santitajackson.bsky. Social. Santita Jackson, just look me up. Yes, I look different than I do on every iteration. Every page, you catch me in a different part of my life. So I look different. All of my little icons, but look at the lips. They're always red. You'll know it's me. And then, of course, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. And so let's talk about this because I'm telling you, whenever I want to examine a story and really find out how to interpret, how to really wend my way through the narrative set forth by the corporate media, I always go to fairness and accuracy in reporting. And I have to be completely transparent with you. I started following them during my father's presidential campaigns because Norman Solomon and Jeff Cohen, who co founded this institution, they said, you know what, you all are not covering this campaign correctly. And we're going to call you on it. And so they were tracking everything that these major newspapers did. And they were calling them on it. They even had a famous encounter. Well, they confronted the New York Times editorial board. They said, not only are you misreporting this story, this historic campaign, you're not telling the truth. So that's what they do. But they didn't just do it for the Jackson campaigns. They've been doing it for every iteration of our lives. And so I want you, before I go any further, I want you to go to fair.org and give them your support because they support you. In this moment where corporate media are less trusted than ever before, you need to support the media who support you. You need to get the truth. I say read all the newspapers and then fact check them. And that is what fairness and accuracy in reporting, that's what they do. That's what they do. And they're led by Janine Jackson, my sister, and my brother Jim Narakis. Fairness and accuracy in reporting. I'm always so glad to have you here. And Dr. Alia Amar, brilliant social justice advocate. And I want to let me, me, I'm always peeking around because Jim always thanks me for bringing them on the show. I'm like, you have a home here on this show. You always know I'm always going to call you, but I mean, I could have you every day. This is a story by Paul Hedreen, and I'm going to have him on the show very soon to talk about this and other issues. But I think, Dr. Amar, we really need to understand what's going on, the story behind the story, because we got so caught up in the Signal Gate and the app and what the Trump administration did not do. Did they really guard our nation's security the way that they should? And that was a legitimate question. Those are legitimate questions. But the questions that were not asked and that needed to be answered was really the question surrounding Yemen. Who are they? And why do we want to bomb them? And Paul Hedreen wrote the real scandal of the Yemen bombing is not that they used the wrong app. Mm-hmm. And he talks about the Houthis and who they are and the fact that the Saudis have really been upholding a weak government. Mm-hmm. Well, you know this, Dr. Amar, but most people do not. I mean, the people really, you can almost bet your bottom dollar, as the great Don Cornelius used to say, bet your bottom dollar, that the story that you're hearing is not the story that really needs to be told. And so they talked about, beginning on March 15th, the U.S. military began an operation, it reads, that has killed dozens in Yemen and injured over 100, including women and children, in which Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth frankly acknowledged the leveling of a civilian building. Killing people, everybody, killing people. U.S. planning for the operation was revealed in articles by The Atlantic's Jeffrey Goldberg, who was on that call, who was the whistleblower. Wink, nod, emphasis mine, which disclosed that the journalist had been inadvertently added to a Signal group chat that top administration officials were using to discuss the bombing plans, an inclusion that was not noticed by any of the intended participants. This prompted a furor in establishment newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post, centering on the Trump administration's use of an insecure messaging app to discuss classified matters. While leading newspapers were not wrong to skewer the Trump administration for the use of a commercial messaging app to communicate confidential information, the focus on Washington Palace intrigue over the bombing of women and children is a stark reminder of corporate media priorities. And they're not telling us, Jim Narakis, who's being bombed and why.
The Houthis are a movement in Yemen, which is the country to the south of Saudi Arabia on the Arabian Peninsula. It's a quite poor country in comparison to Saudi Arabia. It lacks the vast oil wealth that Saudi Arabia has, that makes Saudi Arabia such a close ally of the United States. And the Houthis represent a different strain of Islam than is practiced in Saudi Arabia. This reflects the Saudis' desire for a different government in Yemen, one that is more aligned with their agenda, religious and otherwise. There was a very bitter civil war in Yemen that the Saudis intervened against the Houthis in the civil war, using a great deal of bombing and starvation as a weapon of war. And the United States was on the Saudi Arabia side during this conflict, providing weaponry, providing intelligence. We were very much implicated in this very vicious intervention on the part of Saudi Arabia. It resulted in a ceasefire in 2022, and since then the Houthis have been not in control of the entire country, but in charge of the country's capital and the majority of its population. And Yemen came back into the news because of the genocide in Gaza, where the Israeli government was killing huge numbers of civilians in Gaza, using starvation as a weapon of war. And there is in international law, there is an obligation of countries to not only not commit genocide, not only not to support genocide, but to actively oppose genocide. This is an obligation under the Genocide Treaty that most countries have signed. And the Houthis are one of the few countries that are taking this seriously in the case of Gaza, and have been, as the way that they can intervene to try to oppose the genocidal war, have been targeting shipping in the Red Sea, which goes by Yemen, on the way to the Suez Canal in Europe. So quite a bit of the trade between Europe and Asia goes by Yemen, and they have the ability to target it with missiles, and this is what has been happening. And the discussion that was exposed in the Atlantic had the Trump administration talking about how the United States needed to send a message by retaliating against a strike against shipping that resumed when Israel resumed its assault on Gaza, and that is the substance of the discussion that Jeffrey Goldberg was privy to. Had to do with the top administration officials, notably not including President Trump, which is an interesting fact revealed here. But deciding whether or not they should go ahead and bomb Yemen as a result of this shipping attack. And they decided that they would. The bombs went out, and they all kind of high-fived each other in the group chat. The discussion, as Paul's article talks about, in the New York Times and Washington Post, was heavily focused on the fact that this group chat was included Jeffrey Goldberg, a writer for The Atlantic, an editor for The Atlantic. And that was the focus of roughly, I would say 5/6 of the discussion had to do with the group chat, and 1/6 of the discussion had to do with Yemen, which is an odd ratio, I would say. And to me, the thing that is most striking is that there are rules of war. There are laws of war. You are obligated when you are conducting a war to not attack civilians. And there are exceptions to there's a general rule against attacking civilian installations. There are very limited exceptions to this that deal with military necessity and proportionality. And I'm not a lawyer, but my layperson's reading of this chat suggests that they are in effect confessing to committing war crimes here, in the sense that they are talking about what their motives are for committing this bombing of a civilian apartment building. It's referred to as the girlfriend's building. And they do it not because there is some kind of military necessity, which is what they would claim if this conversation was not public. They would say, "Oh no, we had to do that because the terrible things would have happened that are confidential." But it's very clear that they did not have to do this. They did this because they wanted to do it. They felt that it would be politically advantageous to do it, to make this attack on these civilians, kill these civilians. And that is, in my understanding, a war crime. You can't kill civilians to make a political point. That is, in fact, what we refer to as terrorism.
But wait a minute, Jim. Let's stay right there for a minute, because I want us to both. I want you and Dr. Amar to expound upon that, because the corporate media ignore the war crime. They don't even mention it.
Yeah.
Or not war crime, the war crimes, because a lot of people have been killed.
Which is what they've been doing in that region, because of some very partisan, it seems like, interests. And when I say partisan interests, I mean that there is a tendency throughout the region to ignore war crimes that are being committed on behalf of or in any relation to Israel. And so when you've spent 75 or more years ignoring crimes against a population, and saying that the oppressors of those people are your strongest allies in the region, then you have something like a group of people who say, we are standing against in the only way that we can, because we don't have the military might to invade. We are standing against the genocide of people like us. In the region, these are brothers and sisters in faith. These are cousins. These are people living in lands sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims that are slowly being changed into a region that is largely attempting to be claimed by one group, instead of recognizing the heterogeneity of faiths and cultures that have history in that region. And so when you have a people that began to say, we could at least close this sea down. We could at least fight in this particular way. We can lead to the collapse of a port, so that these arms that we don't want going in to continue to perpetuate the war crimes that you won't even call war crimes, that we will do that. We in the United States say, well, we're going to target you as the terrorists. We're going to say that you are the people that are committing war crimes. Now, to be clear, and Jim, may I call you Jim? Because I'm afraid of trying to pronounce your last name. I butcher last names. I'm so sorry. But, you know, Jim is talking about a region that has been in conflict and had a civil war going on for, oh God, what is it now? 15 years, 16 years of war in Yemen specifically. There are almost 400,000 people that have been killed over that period of time. The only thing that's comparable, and possibly one of the reasons they can relate so heavily to an empire coming in and causing that level of destruction to a people, is that 400,000 people have been killed, more than likely in Palestine, in a much shorter amount of time. And so you're seeing starvation, malnutrition, death at large scales, and the complete dehumanization of also the Yemenis. And so why do we feel that people should live under circumstances of oppression without ever rising up to push back against that oppression by whatever means necessary
Well,
and
wait a minute.
whatever means available?
But I have to interrupt you here, just as I interrupted Jim.
Mhm.
No rakists.
No rakists. No rakists. Okay.
That's right. Break it down. That's right, syllable by syllable.
Yes. Okay.
But we're not told that story.
No.
And I think it's, so Americans are caught by our unawares, and we get misdirected, misled, if you will, to another story, and we gloss over the deaths and the war crimes.
Yes, we do.
And when our troops are there, I mean, and the Secretary of Defense was on this call, that endangers them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I want us to just help people to understand. We don't even know where Yemen is.
We don't know where it is, and we don't know how large any of these neighboring countries are. We send billions, billions, billions. Even as our own government is being defunded and destroyed, we are sending billions over to Israel. Israel, you would think that it's the size of Russia or maybe China. It's the size of Jersey. It's the size of New Jersey. And it has an overly exaggerated influence in world politics and in Middle Eastern politics. But part of that influence is a disregard for the international rules of law and international law itself. And so to see that, the members of our own defense organizations took this step, the missile guy's girlfriend, come on, we're not more specific than that. And the missile guy's girlfriend's apartment, which I don't know, that doesn't sound like a base to me. That doesn't sound like anything huge to me. But didn't we just do that over the course of the last year and a half when it came to hospitals and civilian apartment buildings in Palestine, in Gaza? Didn't we just do the same thing? So it's suddenly something where certain countries can ignore international law and commit war crimes and say, we want to get this one guy. But in order to get him in an occupied apartment building, we will murder women and children who have nothing to do with it. They don't know him. They don't know his girlfriend. They're not a part of any terrorist anything. And in order to get you to swallow that, we will try not to tell you about it. But if we have to tell you about it, we will come back to our imperialist, dialogue of how maybe just all these people are
Everybody's
terrorists, and all
Hamas.
these, everybody's Hamas, everybody's Houthi, everybody belongs to some strange sounding organization
Right.
that someone else can decide is worthy of death. That is dangerous. That is
Yeah.
dangerous.
Jim, that
When you
resonates with you. Why?
when corporate media do talk about the Houthis or talk about Yemen, the thing that sort of begins and ends the conversation is Iran backed
Right.
or Iranian proxies, and that is all you need to know, according to the corporate media, is that the Houthis are allied with Iran, and so if you don't like Iran, then you don't like the Houthis and whatever they have coming to them. One of the foremost principles of corporate media is the idea of American exceptionalism, which is the idea that the rules don't apply to the United States, and by extension, they don't apply to the allies of the United States. And it's as an ally of the United States that Israel can commit war crimes, that Saudi Arabia can commit war crimes, and of course the United States can commit war crimes because the rules don't apply to us. The rules are for other people, for other countries, and that is something it's not often talked about, but that is underlying that's the logic that lies behind, like, why when people come out and describe killing a bunch of civilians, why isn't that a problem? That isn't a problem because the rules that you can't kill civilians are not applicable when you're talking about the United States. That's the underlying logic.
And Americans are not aware of that, because we buy buy the narrative of the corporate media, although we do not trust them. They are more mistrusted than ever before. But we buy the narratives about these other people, because we other people in the global South, quite frankly, whatever the South is, because most of them they're not just in the southern part of the world. But okay, that's another conversation for another day. But instead of saying the third world, we talk about the global South. Okay, got it. But we don't tell this narrative. We don't tell this narrative. We don't tell this story.
No.
And I can't help but think. I know that is wrong, but it's also dangerous.
Yeah, people in the group chat, I think it's Hegseth, says no one knows who the Houthis are, and that is generally true, but it's not because of an ignorance on the part of the public. We have an institution that is supposed to inform people about important events in the world around them. It's called the media. And if people don't know what's going on in a place where it's important for people to know, well, that's who you'd look at to blame. The media are not doing their job in informing us, and when you look at these stories, they are so uninformative. They really are designed not to tell you about this place, not to interest you in the reality there, but to stop you thinking. These are kind of like bumpers for critical thinking. That when you read the story, you're like, oh, I know everything that I need to know about that. Because if you needed to know more, they would have more stories about it, right?
Yeah.
The most simplistic thing you can do is to create a stereotype. Stereotypes are very powerful. And so once you've created a stereotype, you don't have to tell the story anymore. The person will tell the story to themselves. And so it's intentional that the media has used terms like Iran backed, that the government
Mhm.
uses terms like Iran backed, because they elicit immediately the stereotype of these dangerous others, and the perpetual enemy. However, we've seen something recently that suggests that there can be a change and a shift. You know, this sudden acceptance by a portion of Americans of how wonderful Russia must be, suggests that a well-entrenched stereotype is vulnerable to people in power beginning to introduce a different stereotype, a different narrative. And so what I liked, I read the FAIR article as well, and what I liked about that was the portions that said we need to have the media change the terminology and expand the terminology in order to educate people more fairly, and let them think about things differently. Um,
Well, what would the impact be if we were educated? Because we're not. I can't even. We're not educated at all, Dr. Amar.
right.
I mean, this is a part of the world that you spend a significant. This is your part of the world, and you spend a significant amount of time there in that part of the world.
Mhm.
Not that you haven't been in other places. You've also lived in that part of the world. What don't we understand?
You know, it's interesting because having lived in that part of the world, I actually could not have this conversation. As I thought about doing the show today, I was like, wow, I may really not be able to walk into the UAE again. Um,
Well, now then, maybe I need to go bloop and let you go.
no, I'm okay. I wasn't planning any recent trips anyway.
My brother thanks you.
Yeah.
Jim Narakis, to full disclosure, we all went to high school together.
Yes.
He's also a world-renowned scientist, research scientist. And bless your heart, you were in that part of the world October 7th,
Yes,
and
I
you
was.
called your classmate,
Yes, I
Congressman
did.
Jackson, and said, I'm stuck.
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
having an attack. And I
right.
said, what are you doing? Oh, okay. Let me try.
That really was, you know, friend to friend. It wasn't some official reaction or anything like that. He said, "What are you doing over there?" Like I was like, "Well, I came to do this, and so yeah, I'm not
Oh,
planning any other trips. And please feel free to let him
let
know
me
that he
just
doesn't
say
have to
thank you.
educate me on the complexities of evacuations." So it won't happen.
I'm just
But I
saying.
but I did live in the UAE as we entered the war, and there were a lot of restrictions around even discussing publicly anything about Yemen. So this is not a
Well,
conversation.
how does that work?
Well, when you live in a country, you abide by the rules of that country,
No, but I mean,
and
when you say you can't discuss it publicly, I mean, how does that work?
f- you don't have freedom of speech,
Okay.
and freedom of the press in the same way that you do here. You can
Okay.
have many conversations. You can have conversations with your friends and your buddies about anything that you
Mhm.
want, but you can't begin to say things that challenge government
Publicly.
positions. Yeah, and
Okay.
so you
Well,
know,
you can't do that in the United States, and you know, generally there's not as much free speech in America as we like to think there is. But I'm
yes,
talking specifically about
Wow.
the change
Colombia, and
in the free speech regime under the second Trump administration,
yes,
where if you write an op-ed that has makes a criticism of Israel,
mhm,
you can be deported.
yeah.
You can be
Okay.
put in. You
I
can be
want you
put
to say that.
in
Say that one more
a
time.
black site.
Say that one
Um,
more time. What?
the,
What happened?
if you write an op-ed that is critical of Israel as a legal immigrant,
Mhm.
a legal non-citizen resident of the United States, you can be uh, seized by ICE and put in a detention facility without access to a lawyer. because you have said something that is contrary to the official position of the United States.
That's exactly what happened to Rumaisa Old Turk. You know, she had her name on a byline
Right, right.
for an article, for an op-ed.
Yeah.
And then she finds herself surrounded by people who masked up. They didn't come to her with masks on. They masked up as they violated her rights.
Right.
And so, yes, you're right. We don't have the same level of freedom of speech in this country. And that, I think, brings us to a really good point about how dangerous it is to ignore what is happening on the international scene with the violations of international law, because that's always just a series of dominoes falling.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now here it is, encroaching upon the freedom of speech and the freedom of protest of American citizens. And we see that the same administration is ignoring justices in this country. They are ignoring the law in this country.
Yeah.
And
one of my favorite signs I saw at the protest yesterday was first they came from Mahmoud.
Mhm.
And Mahmoud Khalil, the graduate student at Columbia, who's also facing getting kicked out of the country, and is in a black site in Louisiana, because
and these are black sites, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Well, how do you define black site?
Well, they're sites that exist to try to remove people from the constitutional system. They want to do things to people that are not allowed under the law, and so you need to put them in a place where they don't have access to lawyers, to the courts, to habeas corpus. Guantanamo is the kind of classic example of, it's a place that exists because the government maintains that the Constitution doesn't apply there, because it's technically part of Cuba, even though Cuba would very much like us to take our naval base and leave. But it's like, actually I'm forgetting his name, but the person who was the Venezuelan national who was sent to El Salvador.
Yes.
Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia.
That's right.
Thank you. And the Trump administration admits that he was sent by mistake, that he is not, in fact, a gang member, has actually done nothing wrong, but paperwork was wrong and got him sent to El Salvador. But now the Trump administration says, well, we can't do anything about it because he's in El Salvador. But we do. And that is the kind of the purpose of the black site, is to be a place where you can say, what can we do?
See, and I have to tell you what I think we should all find concerning is that when the media, this estate upon which we depend to tell us the truth, to give us the story, they do give us the story, but they give us a narrative. They give us the imperial narrative. Yes. And so we don't, when someone is taken from their lobby or from their home, as these two cases that we just mentioned, we don't sympathize with them. What are they doing here? And they have backgrounds that are a little sketchy. So, and I mean, my goodness. And so, and then by extension, well, Yemen, I mean, please, they're terrorists, aren't they?
Right.
Well, they are in every movie. The call for prayer that is adhered to by 2 billion people on this planet is used as a soundbite in most movies, in the background of most movies, to help condition you to believe that Islam and terrorism are the same thing.
I mean, coming out of Hollywood.
And so, there's an interconnection between the ways in which we become conditioned. I've said before that when I was a kid, I used to cringe a little when the news came on and they would report something like a crime or something, because you could tell who committed it by whether or not their picture was going to go up. But you could also tell what they were trying to say about the image of Black people based on who they interviewed.
Mhm.
So if a Black person was accused of a crime, their picture went up for the entire time that the story was being discussed. And it wasn't like a picture of them taken from their family or something. It was whatever was the most criminal looking picture on earth. I don't know how you get a jury for a person that you found a picture of where it's like, oh my God, they really do look guilty, right?
Remember they darkened OJ?
They darkened OJ.
They
But
darkened
also
OJ.
remember that when we were younger, and you know, you and I grew up in the same neighborhood as well. Um, they could find for almost any story in a Black neighborhood, whether it was a crime or a fire, they could find somebody that had limited English, standard English proficiency, who happened to be wearing corn rollers in their hair, like hair rollers and house shoes. And it was part of, and I got nothing to say about people like that because that describes my grandmother in the privacy of her own home. But outside of her home and outside of many of our homes, we weren't coming out regularly like that. That was the image that they needed to project. And it's the image that they have kept in movies and media for decades so that you don't remember that dignified image that Dr. King and his protesters helped to put into the mind of the American people of Black people. When Black men carried signs saying, I am a man, they didn't look like the people that got put on the media and in Hollywood's depiction of Black people, so that we have a stereotype about Black people. And now the same thing is true when you look at stereotypes about Muslims and Arabs. Yeah, I don't know who these people are that they have in the movies half the time. You know, I lived in the building that Fast and Furious 5 was taped in, I believe. And it's the installation where they have the car that comes out of one building and flies into another building, flies into another building. I lived in 2 of those buildings, right? And the interesting thing to me was like, they had so many stereotypes about Arabs in that one scene that I didn't even know where they were talking about. I was happy they had fictionalized the country,
Right.
because it was such a biased stereotype, again, to dehumanize Arabs and Muslims.
But then if you use a generic country, then you can apply that stereotype to any real world country that you need it to be applied to.
Exactly.
And see, this is what we do. Because
Yes.
one of my dear girlfriends is the first African American to own a Major League Baseball team.
Ooh.
And I remember, oh yeah, Tracy Lewis. Her father was a banker, and she was from a wealthy family. We grew up together.
Mhm.
And Tracy, when they had her in People magazine. They featured her there. She went to Williams College, graduated.
Mm.
She went to lab school. I mean,
Mhm.
we've known each other all of our lives. Her father was extremely supportive, and he was vice president of Independence Bank, which was the biggest Black bank in the country. Then he got his own bank. Then he owned radio stations. And when she came out of college, he bought her a baseball team. And what was interesting was watching the interviews. And Tracy's extremely sharp, and a woman of tremendously high consciousness. And she said, you know what? It's very clear you've never met anyone like me, and I want you to know I exist.
Mhm.
Over and over again.
Mhm.
My friends went to college. My friends have housekeepers.
Mhm.
Some people have drivers.
Mhm.
Not that that's the only thing. She said, you know, there is a body of Black people and my father's also very active in the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
Because we need that. I mean, she just went into this whole thing in People magazine, on the national talk shows, because she was like a unicorn to them.
Right.
And what I'm saying is, when I look at what's happening in the Middle East, And what's happening around the world? What's happening? I mean, look, Elon Musk, the narrative on South Africa is so off. Elon Musk has the space to bring Afrikaners to the United States.
Right.
Afrikaners.
As if we need
Afrikaners.
more white supremacists.
I mean, hey, I was telling one of my friends who is a wonderful human being, and he said, "Well, I don't know if I have a real problem." He said, "My bigger problem." I said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" I said, "I'm a black person in America. I'm feeling some kind of way about Afrikaners."
Mhm.
I said, "I feel about Afrikaners the way Jewish people feel about Nazis."
Mhm.
I said, "And I'm not going to back up off of that." So if you're bringing them here, and you've already snuck them in, because Peter Thiel is not South African, but he was raised in Southern Africa, which was South Africa on steroids. The whole front, all the frontline states, Rhodesia, all of that, it was all the same thing. All the same thing. I mean, that's why they couldn't stand Mugabe, because Mugabe's negotiation was give me my land and my vote.
Mhm.
When he negotiated to get the land, he used to have tea with Queen Elizabeth every year, and he loved it. He and his wife were teachers who were beloved and renowned on the continent of Africa, because teachers, as you know, in that part of the world are exalted. When he demanded his land, she never spoke to him again.
Mhm.
And which just brings me to this. I know we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left, but I think it's important for us to really, and I'm glad that you're here, Dr. Amar, and I'm glad that you're here, Jim, because this story is important because we don't understand it. And we were directed toward an app while people are dying, and no one even knows why. No one knows who they are, but the Houthis. Oh, they must be awful. Yemen. Oh, my goodness. Who are these people? I mean, it's not England. Right? It's not, it's the here we go with this global South again. Look at them. They can't govern themselves. When Prince William, at the outbreak of the Ukraine conflict, when he said, in Europe we don't have wars like this, I was like, are you crazy? All y'all do is fight each other all day long. Are you crazy? You think I haven't read history?
Right. Did you have a bad history tutor? Do you not understand?
And you've had access to the best education, and I'm trying to find out how we are to read the news, Jim, because it's very clear on the regular, as they say in the parlance of the colloquialisms of our people. On the regular, we're not told the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, blah blah blah? I mean, NPR, because NPR has all these people have their biases and they don't tell the whole truth. They don't.
One of my favorite quotes about the media is from Malcolm X, who said, "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the oppressed and loving the oppressor."
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
And I will say that how you should read the New York Times is very carefully. I do think it's an important news organ, as is the Washington Post. They have teams of reporters that dwarf the reporting staff of any independent outlet. They're all over the world. They're finding things out and reporting things that are important to know. They have a ideology that they strenuously pretend not to have, that colors how they're reporting the news, that colors what they present as the important things, that colors who you are supposed to sympathize with, who you're supposed to empathize with, and who you do not need to empathize with, who you can treat as basically non-player characters in the world, that whose deaths are not to be worried about. And I guess I would say, like, perhaps the most important thing that you can do when you are reading corporate media, especially, but not exclusively, but especially when you're reading international coverage, is to remind yourself that every person is valuable.
Mm.
That people's values don't change by what country they live in or what ethnicity they have. It doesn't make them more or less valuable as people. And that is something that clearly, that is not the rule of thumb that is followed by the people who decide what is newsworthy and what is not newsworthy. But as a news reader, you should remind yourself of that.
It's important to know. Dr. Amar?
Wow, I feel like Jim Narakis said it perfectly. You do have to remember that there are people behind these stories. Be cautious of numbers, because numbers are there to numb you to the empathy. Numbers often are used to create selective paths of empathy. We care when it's one person and they focus on that person's story. We know something about them. We stop caring when it's 50, 100, 1,000.
Why?
Again, I think it may become too much to process, and you began to just clump those entities together.
So you say we stop personalizing.
Yeah.
If it's one story we can focus on, okay. But if
it's outside of our experience, we've all known people who have died. We know what it's like for one person to die. None of us have known 40,000 people who have died. We don't have a memory of that kind of loss. So
Right.
So it does become abstract. It does become.
It becomes
you have to remind yourself, and good media does this. It reminds you that those 40,000 people represent 40,000 individuals who have, who are just as real, have the same, dreams and heartaches and what have you as anyone and their loss is just as important.
Right. It's human nature that the person who wouldn't kick a dog will stamp on an anthill. They'll walk into a group of ants walking past or something. It becomes meaningless. The largesse makes the individual atrocities seem small. And so you're right, Jim. People have to come back to seeing the individuals in that story and identifying with them. We also have to remember that for the vast majority of us, we are not the overlords. We are the ants. We are the little people. And we keep, if nothing more in American history in this moment is showing us that, it's how very quickly our needs can be dismissed. And so you have to challenge power when power does not improve your life. You have to challenge that. We're not all going to be billionaires, unless the economy goes really, really badly. And the American dollar is completely devalued. If I got to take 100,000 to buy a loaf of bread and get some eggs, I'm out of here. I'll beg my way back into some country. But
okay.
But we have to think about the fact that our humanity is common. One of the most beautiful things about religion, and religion does have its flaws. Historically, we wind up fighting each other even there. But one of the most beautiful things about it, particularly for the monotheistic religions, those are the ones I'm familiar with. I'm not saying that other religions may not have the same messages. Mm-hmm. It's that we are reminded that God considers us one body. We are reminded that God focuses on humanity and sends common messages of how we should treat each other in humanity. We are reminded that God cares about the small person. God cared about the individual boy infants that were going to be massacred by Pharaoh. Mm-hmm. He cared about them. God had Moses' mother place him in the basket to be sent to the house of Pharaoh so that he could be raised within that system and come to understand it so that he could learn how to take it apart, essentially, to move the people from that circumstance. God cares about these individuals. The Pharaoh didn't, but the rulers didn't. And so, from the Islamic faith, people say a lot about Muslims and Muslims fighting and things, but God says to us, the fighting has been prescribed for you. It's been commanded for you, even though it is a thing that you dislike. But you may dislike a thing that is good for you. And then in another part, it says that, you fight because verily oppression is worse than death, to be oppressed. And so God cares about oppressed people, and God says, do something about your circumstances to change that. That doesn't mean go out and wantonly, do things, because even in our same book, it tells us when to stop fighting, just don't go on that. But we have messages over and over and over that it is not the rich and the powerful that we need to focus on. We must remember each other, the 99% of us that will never have $1 billion under our control at all. We have to care. And that's what you need to look for in that story. How is that person my brother? How is that person my sister? And how is my brother or my sister treated?
Well, Jesus did say that what you've done unto the least of these, you've also done unto me. And
Yes.
really, it does come down to how you treat the weakest link. You're only as strong as the weakest link. The chain is going to break there, but the chain can be mended there. So it's
Yes.
something for us to think about. Jim, I thank you for bringing us to this point to help us to understand, wait a minute, every life is valuable. Thank you, Dr. Amar, for helping us to understand that when the deaths occur on Ma, we just say, well, you just, maybe it's too much for you to handle, but it needs to be a lot for you to handle because every single life is precious.
Yep.
Every life. And these institutions cannot be sustained if they're not going to tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in this time of tremendous change, it is time for change to occur. That's why YouTube has now become the biggest television network because people are looking for different answers. They're not going to so-called legacy media. Thank you, Jim Narakis, for helping me to understand. It's not corporate. It's not mainstream media. It's corporate media.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you zero in on who they are, you understand whom they serve.
Yeah. And it's not extreme.
It's not mainstream. We're mainstream
Mm-hmm.
because we're in the stream. We're not in houses on the hill. Dr. Alia Amar, social justice advocate, brilliant. Thank you always. Jim Narakis, fairness and accuracy in reporting, everybody, fair.org. Please, it's not Christmas time, but put them on your list. Because look, my father often says, you're not going to ride to freedom in Pharaoh's chariot. You have to pay for this yourself. And I tell you what, I read FAIR. I don't let a day go by without checking to see what they've published. I don't. Their podcast, all of it. I want to know because they help me to get the story right. So much love and many blessings to you and to everyone. Hey, stay on the lookout because and it's March Madness. Maybe you'll get a little bit of a get a bit of a break. I mean, because the ladies were going to get a champion, I think tonight. But it's all great. March Madness. Let's just make sure we don't have a whole lot more sadness in this world because we really do need some joy, and we can get some joy by making the change that we need. Love you, everybody. See you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. May God bless you real good. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota.